Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. On the podcast today, we have Dr. Daniel Wendler, also known as Dr. Dan, who has reached a lot of people through his social media presence as an autistic psychologist who has also spoken in many platforms to encourage individuals socially. He also is someone who motivates individuals within the HR establishment and which gives a lot of talks on improve social development just across the spectrum. And so, Dr. Dan, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I'm excited for the conversation.
Is there anything that led you down this path to where you are now as this voice for neurodivergent individuals, supporting them and counseling them in so many different ways?
Yeah. So the turning point for me really was my moment of diagnosis. I was just before starting high school, I was diagnosed with autism or technically with Asperger's. So I like to tell people that I'm vintage because you can't get that diagnosis anymore.
Right, but you
But yeah,
could. We're in the same generation because I
mhm.
worked with the old school Asperger's kids, and that was totally cool. But now the DSM doesn't like it.
Correct. And also I guess there was some reporting that indicated that he was a Nazi
Hmm.
collaborator. And so I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm okay with retiring that name. I think
right.
if we work with the Nazis,
Yeah,
we can
that's
set your name
fine. Mhm.
aside. But yeah, like this was really pivotal for me because I knew that I was different than the other kids. I knew that I struggled socially, but I didn't know why. And I thought for the longest time, well, there's just something wrong with me. Like maybe I'm bad, maybe I'm too weird, maybe there's something just wrong about who I am that means that other people don't find value in me. But then when I was diagnosed, I realized that like okay, one of the big defining features of my diagnosis was these areas of social skills that I was lacking in. But I'm like, well, you can learn a skill. And so I went through the process of trying to teach myself these social skills. I was studying Spanish at the time. I didn't stick with the Spanish, but I kind of looked at it in the same way of like, here's a foreign language. I didn't grow up speaking this, so it's going to be harder for me, but can I learn some pieces that'll help me? And I realized that I could. And then after some years of that and being able to build connections, see how amazing it is to have friends, stuff like that, I was like, I want to try to help other people with this. So I started a website, improveyoursocialskills.com. It's still out there, but it was just like me being like, here's some thoughts that I have on how to be social. And I realized two things as a result of launching that. First, that there was a real need for it, not just among people on the spectrum, but kind of everybody. Because the fact
Mhm.
is like this goal of learning communication skills, it's not a unique need that autistic people have. It's like everybody needs to communicate better with
Mhm.
everybody else. Nobody's born, reading minds. And so like this is just something we all need to work on and we can all get better at. And then I realized number two that like I didn't want to be just some dude on the internet. Like here's some of my opinions, here's some of my thoughts. I know that some people have been very successful at that, but I'm like, I want to be able to trust what I'm telling people. I want to base it off of expertise. And so that's what led me to become a psychologist, go to grad school. And then since then, I've kind of continued in that work of sort of doing outreach, sharing ideas, helpful tips with people. But now it's kind of as a psychologist, so I can kind of mix my lived experience and my clinical experience. And then also it's not just the one website, but I do a lot of social media outreach. As you mentioned, I do a lot of keynote talks at conferences, corporate trainings, things of that nature, because I want to kind of share what I've learned from my life and in my training with the world to help other, little autistic Daniels who are growing up now
Mhm.
be able to have a better shot at a future than I did when I was growing up.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, it just seems like every step is connected to each other. Like one step led to another, and you really got in touch with what was your purpose, your calling. And I like how you touched upon the universality of it all, how social communication is something that everybody is working through and working on. Of course, it is difficult in a neurotypical world for our neurodivergent population, specifically the individuals with autism and social communication challenges, to maybe understand certain nuances, actually many nuances, but in general, interpersonal skills I feel like are really difficult these days, especially with the generations that are just continuing with the media. Like I didn't grow up, I know you probably didn't grow up completely with just social media. I didn't have any social media until, later on in the day. And I'm noticing that people are just interacting in such a different way. And sometimes I feel like it almost, even that, like the COVID-19 regression in my mind was kind of like a social regression where people are interacting in a remote way. And then you come face to face and you have also different generations mixing together, which I'm sure you get to when you're in the workplace, because it's getting complicated when you have Gen Z, Gen Millennials, Gen Alpha. They're not even working yet. Who knows what's going to happen? So it's so great that you speak to everybody about this. It's not just one group of people, but it seems like your inspiration was the fact that you were little Daniel, you were little Dan trying to understand the world. And so when you were little Dan, trying to understand the world, you were maybe 12. I'm just making up an age, right? What was life like in terms of you trying to access the social world? If you can remember in those earlier years, what were your big struggles or hurdles?
Yeah. I think that when I think back to being a little Dan, like my biggest struggle was really the sense of helplessness.
Hmm.
Like, I felt like I remember feeling like I know what I'm trying to do here, and it just doesn't work. Like, I could see, here's these other kids, they're all talking together, they're all having a good time. I'm just gonna go and be a part of them, and then I go and I try my best, and then it falls apart, right? Like,
Right.
they get up and they leave, they make fun of me, they whatever, and then I just am completely baffled. I'm like, "Why did that happen?" I don't know, like, what to do differently. I don't know what this what was going on here, and so I remember, like, that helplessness. And then I remember also this sort of this weight of, I think, sadness that came from that, where it was, because I would try so hard over and over, like any small additional failing or struggle or setback would really hit me hard. I have this distinctive memory of being in art class in like elementary school, middle school. We were learning how to draw a tree, right? So this is not, they're not teaching us to be, Monet or anything. Like, this is very basic, but for some
Yeah.
reason I couldn't like get the branches right. And I remember like just crying at my desk because I'm looking around. Everybody else is drawing their trees are looking fine. I can't do it. Later on I would learn that dysgraphia, like poor small motor dexterity, is part
Right.
of how autism shows up for me. But all I knew at that time is I was like, this should be hard. And so why is it that even this small thing I can't do? I think that was a big part of it, which is, I think, part of why my diagnosis was so healing, because it wasn't just this like, well, there's nothing wrong with you, but it was also this like, well, you have agency, you have power, you have the ability to learn skills and to build the life you want. It's not just this helplessness of you're going to try and then you're going to fail.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you touched upon how you were trying to interact with these individuals who were your peers, who you were going to school with. And I think so many times it's misunderstood. Like a lot of people in the education world, even that I've worked alongside, they need time to process that. A lot of times they'll say things like, oh, they don't really want friends right now. They're not really ready for it. And then as a speech pathologist who developed an expertise in that area through the Nest program here in New York City. Obviously, we learned that actually there are different ways to seek out friendships, and sometimes it doesn't land the way you want it to, but it's not the fact that people want to be alone. It's almost, and you're the psychologist, I mean, just human nature. As human beings, we want to feel connection. We want to feel connected to others. So it's so hard, especially in those years that you're describing where you already feel like, oh dear, like I can't even get somebody to really interact with me, engage with me. And then on top of it, like a simple task is so complex. And I see it so often where someone is literally not a branch, but just doing something so simple, a simple task in class, and they just shut down. And it's like, what's the trigger? Why are they so upset? And it's because they're not understanding something, and they're just so fed up from trying to understand all these competing things. I think people don't give people enough credit for that, and you're, again, as a psychologist, and when you have repeated failures happening over and over and over again, eventually you're going to be triggered a lot, no?
Yeah, no, I think that sometimes people have this exasperation with autistic kids or even autistic adults where they're like,
Yeah.
"Come on, it's a drawing of a tree. What's the big deal? Why can't you hold it together?" But the fact is, it's not about the drawing of the tree. It's about
Mhm.
the like, my life feels like a string of failures, and and feels like I can't do anything right. And then now here's the latest reminder in a list of 100 of those things. And so, like, that, I mean, it makes sense to cry about that, right? Like, that
Yeah.
would,
Yeah.
but I think we just don't often take the time to kind of extend that empathy. And I think especially like, the more that somebody's different than us, the harder it is for us to put ourselves in their shoes. So like, a neurotypical person might be able to understand why a neurotypical child is crying, but they might not be able to understand why an autistic child is crying. And that I think is I think one of my big, if I could put a billboard out and have everybody in the world see it, I would be like, look, like, everybody's carrying more suffering than you're aware of. And this is, kids, adults, autistic, neurotypical, it doesn't matter. Everybody's carrying some kind of hard thing in their life. And so when somebody is doing something that you dislike, I think start from this place of empathy and to say, what is it possible that there's a pain here that I'm not seeing? And if I was in their shoes and I was feeling the same pain, I would act out in the same way. And that can oftentimes give you greater patience in dealing with that person.
Yeah, I think that it's so hard sometimes when you're not in someone's shoes to really understand why they're acting the way they are. Just in general on a day-to-day basis, right? We're all carrying some sort of pain or suffering with us. It's just not all of it's visible. And I think the invisible is a little bit harder to understand, and it's not something that's maybe physical that you see that's right in your face. And so I think, yeah, empathy is really important. And honestly, from my experiences over the years as a speech pathologist, I found that the teens and tweens in autism in the program I worked at were some of the most empathetic people, and the way they showed love and support was just so amazing. And I'm not just saying that, I saw it. I saw the way they extended a hand when they saw someone in distress, and they picked up on it. And maybe they felt maybe like they needed to be there for that person because someone wasn't there for them. They didn't want anyone to feel left out. So it was really something powerful. But yeah, so it's interesting because now you work with adults as a clinical psychologist. And so I'm so curious because a lot of these teens and tweens go on and become adults, and adults can reflect on younger years and are dealing with all sorts of different struggles. What are some of the common struggles that you see in your practice when working with the adults?
Yeah. So I think I'll touch on I think two things that are in some ways like opposite sides of the same coin. I think one
Okay.
of the biggest struggles that people run into is what's called the cliff, which is that there's a lot of supports out there for, autistic kids, and then you turn 18 and it's like, okay, bye, you no longer
Mm,
qualify for any of this. And
hmm.
so then somebody oftentimes is able to do okay with the right kind of supports, but then you withdraw those supports and then now they fail. And I think that's one piece of it that oftentimes people just sort of spiral downwards because you pulled the rug out from under them. And then I think the other side that I see is that there are sometimes people who have the ability to make it through the cliff, who have the ability to maybe, hide their needs more, mask their struggling more, and appear as though they're okay. And so even though the supports are withdrawn, they still are on some levels successful, but there's this hidden cost, there's this hidden suffering. And so you can get into, people talk a lot about autistic burnout of like, okay, well, I'm holding it together day after day and I can do that. I can make it through this environment that feels inhospitable, but every day I do it, it's like I gotta clench my grip a little bit tighter. And at some point that really gets to me. Or you can have the same thing that I think, as a psychologist, I see happen to anybody who has some kind of pain in their life that they don't give themselves permission to feel or receive compassion for, is that you start to numb out the hard things because you don't feel like you can ever get support to deal with them, and then that causes you to numb out everything else. And so you see autistic people who get disconnected from their feelings. They just sort of go through life in this very numb kind of way, or they get caught up in numbing kinds of activities. Like, nobody plays video games for 14 hours a day every day because the video game is just that fun. It's
Right.
because when you do that, you can numb out, you can disconnect from your reality.
Dopamine hit, right?
Exactly, yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's the other piece that I see, that sometimes people like the support is withdrawn and then they flail around, and it's clear that they're struggling, and then sometimes the support is withdrawn and then they just quietly carry the burden of that into their life until they kind of forget what it would feel like to actually be supported. They only kind of know what it's like to be deprived of the things that they need.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that because I've had people on this podcast that spoke to specialized colleges. There aren't that many of them, but that include those supports that are missing because a child just is leaves the educational system 12th grade, right? And then it's over, right? And if there's not the right supports or preparation in place for supports, even though they're disability offices, you're not going to get the same type or level of support. And so I've always grappled with, okay, and maybe you can help me with this. On some level, you want the individual to be independent, right? And be independent enough so that when they do go to college and supports are withdrawn, they're able to cope and not have to mask and just, able to cope in a better way. And but then on the flip side, you need a level of support when you're going through high school. So is there an answer that Dr. Dan can give to this one?
I mean, eh, I wish that I think the biggest thing that I would say is that the main thing you can control is to be asking the right question. The answer is kind of muddled, but the right question is exactly kind of how you're expressing it of like, how do we give the right amount of support so that it supports growth rather than stagnation or overwhelm, right?
Mhm.
If you're going to the gym and you're trying to build muscle, you want to be able to lift a weight that you're like, oh, this is kind of tough, but I can get it up. If you're like, I could do this all day and I don't even notice it, well, that's not going to strengthen you. And then if you put the weight on and immediately you drop it, then that's also not going to help you. So it's about finding that right level so that over time you can build strength, you can build capacity because I mean, that's part of anybody's growth, right? Is learning how to handle challenges, have resilience, have grit, all of those things. And like, where exactly what is the right dosage? What is the right amount of challenge, support, et cetera? Like that, again, there's no one size fits all. There's no easy answer, but as long as you are making sure that you're asking that question of like, what is the challenge level that is going to contribute to growth? And then if I give a challenge level, if I give a level of support and it feels like either this person's not growing or this person's overwhelmed, well, then can we recalibrate? That I think over time is going to lead you in the right direction. The one more thing that I'd add to that though is that it also I think is really important to ask the question of what are we growing towards? And is this something that the person themselves cares about? Because that's the other thing that I sometimes
Mm.
see is that like
Yeah.
a parent is like, "Oh, like, I really want, my kid to be, independent so that one day he can go, get his own apartment." It's like, well, but maybe the kid doesn't want his own apartment. Like, he loves living at home. Like, he's got mom's cooking and,
Yeah.
the familiar and stuff like that. And so, in that case, the mismatch is that, like, they don't wanna take on the challenge because what's the point, right? Like, I mean, I could learn Portuguese if you really challenged me every day, but I don't wanna learn Portuguese. Like,
No,
I'm
I don't
sure
know if I could. That's too
yeah,
complicated for me.
okay, well, maybe I couldn't. I don't know,
No,
but I'm
no,
like,
I'm
but
just
the
it's a
point
hard
is,
one.
like, I certainly wouldn't be if I don't want to. If I
Mhm.
don't I mean, I'm sure Portugal is
Yeah.
lovely, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, Brazil seems lovely too. I haven't been, but yeah, I mean, I haven't tried to learn Portuguese, but you're right. I mean, it really all is strength and interest based. And as more advocates have come out over the years, all the programs that are built around that social thinking model are geared towards, okay, let's think about the interests, let's think about the strengths, and let's harness those so that we can allow individuals to have that motivation to do different things based on what they enjoy. Otherwise, there's going to be no motivation at all. So it is what you're talking about seems to be very critical. And the other thing that you mentioned was also, okay, there's no prescriptive measure of support that's going to work for one person. The dosaging is going to obviously change. And, the goal is to wean support. But I also heard the concept of interdependence, where it's basically somebody actually on this podcast who's a parent coach was talking about interdependence. And I never thought of it like that. But it's like, am I independent? No, there's a village around me, right? There are people around me that I connect with, that I talk to, that we give each other support. So it's kind of, in my opinion, just when the goals, especially on these, individualized education plans, are all about independence. Well, what does that really look like when the child is no longer a child anymore? Does that mean that they still don't have supports? Like, they could, like, shouldn't we be teaching them, okay, who do you go to? Who can you go to in college, right? Like, shouldn't they know by the time they get to college, if we're doing the job the right way as educators, okay, these are the people that you can turn to when you're having a tough moment.
Yeah. No, I think that framing is really wise because, yeah, like in mature adult relationships, mature adult life, like, we don't want somebody to be, the mountain man living off
Yeah,
in a cabin by themselves and they,
right.
make their own underwear out of beaver
Unless they
pelts or
want
whatever,
to.
right? Yeah, I
right?
mean, unless they want to, then in which case, I mean, it seems like that might be kinda itchy, but, you can do that if you want to.
Mhm.
But yeah, like, I mean, I think about my marriage, right? And, like, the goal for my marriage shouldn't be for me to be like, "Oh, yeah, like, I don't need anything from my wife ever." Like that would be a very distant kind of marriage. What
Yeah,
we want is like, "Oh, like, I need a lot of things from my wife, but also she needs a lot of things from me, and we give a lot to one another." And I think there's some complications in that, you don't want you want to expand somebody's universe beyond just their parents, right? Because their parents aren't going to be around forever. So you wouldn't want to
right.
be like, oh, they're really interdependent with their parents. They give a lot to their
Mhm.
parents. The parents like you want them to be able to go and build that out. But I think that if you think of it in terms of not this person needs to be a mountain man, but this person needs to be able to build a community of friends where the friends help them out, they help the friends out. They find a workplace where they contribute value to their employer and their employer gives them a good work environment and a livable wage, stuff like that. Like, I think that turns it from this isolation view into a way of can you grow their contribution? Can you grow what they can give to other people? Because that's often more meaningful and more motivating than
Yeah.
just how can I just take care of everything on my own?
Yeah, I mean, from a psychological standpoint, giving is so critical in terms of meaning, purpose, value, right? It's so much more purposeful to give, right? Especially when you are experiencing all these challenges, you can find really great meaning in it, just like you've done. So, as a psychologist working with the adults, you're privy to a very interesting perspective because a lot of the adults now were once upon a time these teens and tweens who didn't necessarily get those supports because autism wasn't something that was fully acknowledged, or neurodivergence, whether it's ADHD, ADHD, any type, dyslexia, anything. It just wasn't fully on anybody's radar. I mean, I'm underestimating it. I mean, it really wasn't there. Like the knowledge, the understanding. So do you find that I mean, you can't really share personal things, but as a whole, like the big picture, are clients coming to you with specific difficulties from the past because again, they weren't given the support that we see today?
Yeah, I think that the framing that I like to put on it that I think affects a lot of neurodivergent people. I mean, it affects everybody to a certain extent, but it can be especially potent for neurodivergent folks is kind of the learned helplessness. And I like to kind of give the metaphor of like the way that circus trainers used to like keep their elephants from running away is that when you were a baby elephant, they would like chain you to a tree stump. And then you're a baby, you can't get away from that. But then when you're an adult elephant, they chain you to the same tree stump. Now you're an adult elephant. If you put a little bit of effort into it, you could get that tree stump up and go on a rampage or do
Right,
whatever you wanted, but you don't even think to try because you still feel like the world operates the way that it did when you
right,
were a baby elephant. And I think that same thing often happens to autistic people where it's sort of like, oh, well, when I was a kid, nobody knew about this. And so there were no supports available. And so why would I go look for supports now? And it's like, well, now like there are supports available, right? Like, maybe your workplace has a neurodivergent affinity group, or maybe you can find a therapist who's a neurodiversity affirming, or maybe you can, go find a book and read from it. Or they think, oh, well, earlier in my life, nobody really liked me. And it's like, well, back then your pool was like the 15 kids in your school. Now you have the whole world. You can go, make friends wherever, and you can probably find a group that's going to be more welcoming for you than your random high school classroom was. And so teaching them to kind of have that realization of like, I'm not as limited as I was back then. I have much more power to be able to build the life that I want. That I think is one of the big things that people often need some help working on.
it's unlearning, right? It's a lot of unlearning of what you were taught, which is so hard, which is why they're lucky to come to you. And I'm sure they come with a lot of this, but on that note, I was just a psych major undergrad, so I'm by no means a psychologist, but I just, love learning about psychology. And I know that with autism specifically and other neurodivergent types of difficulties, it's hard to give therapy in a very scripted way. And I found that a lot of people that I've spoken to that are neurodivergent have told me that they couldn't really battle their eating disorder, for example, that was happening at the same time because they were given this prescriptive kind of approach of do X, Y, and Z, or OCD, or it could be even just severe anxiety, phobia, whatever it may be. And they were given like a very prescriptive design, but it wasn't working for the same reason why the prescriptive design for social doesn't work, where it's like, okay, this is how you're going to be social today. You're going to look at that person in the eye, you're going to smile, and you're going to say hello, right? Like it just doesn't work. So, Do you find that in your practice, it's hard to give those prescriptive approaches? Like you have to tailor things a little bit differently than in kind of what the textbooks say,
Yeah.
black and white?
Well, I think that any therapist who's doing a very prescriptive, like well, I shouldn't say any. That's it's a little bit too broad, but oftentimes those prescriptive, manualized kinds of approaches are an indication of a less skilled therapist. Because I think that any I mean, any real again, I'm trying to not
It's
just dunk
okay.
on random
Yeah.
people, but in general, the way that good therapy works is that it should feel a lot like a collaboration where the client is in the driver's seat and the therapist is the GPS, meaning they will help you get where you wanna go, but they're not gonna tell you where to go. So they're not gonna be like, "Here's my agenda, here's the plan, you gotta do this." It's gonna be like, "Okay, here's this goal, and let's do that." And then also, good therapy often is going to feel much more like curiosity than like advice. A therapist will occasionally be like, "Oh, maybe you should try this, or here's this technique to." But usually, I mean, you can get that from a self help book. Usually, the thing that is really useful and unique about good therapy is the curiosity and understanding your experience. It's not the like, you should go to 3 different parties today, and here's what you say. Here's what you should
Yeah.
say. It's
Right.
like, okay, when you think about going to the party, what like what does that bring up for you? And oh, it feels like it makes you nervous. What is the nervousness saying? And what does that remind you of from earlier in your life? And I wonder what that's about. And like those are the things that are genuinely helpful for people. And I think that a good therapist is going to do those things. Whereas a bad therapist is very much like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so that they're just going to bonk on you, with their
Yeah.
hammer of therapy. And so the main thing that I would say is like, I think that neurodivergent people are more likely to need good therapy. Let me back up for a second. I think that even when all you have is a hammer,
Yeah.
if you really are just a nail, if you really have a pretty straightforward, simple kind of issue,
Yeah.
then that therapist might be able to help you. But I think neurodivergent people are much more likely to be in a complex situation where they need a skilled therapist who can give, the highest quality of therapy to them.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. And because you're here, I'll just pick your brain selfishly. Well, there are therapies even that I've approached myself that I've gone to therapy for, like, for example, CBT, right? And some of those certain parts of CBT, certain elements, whether it's ERP or some of the ACT components, ACT is a little less structured, it's more holistic, but they're very rigid, right? And so a lot of times if you don't do things in a certain way, you're usually told by the therapist like, "Oh no, like you're just you have to do it like this," right? If you don't do it like this, you may not get anywhere, right? So I mean, I don't know if you have a purview into that, but while I have you on the podcast, maybe you can speak a little bit to that, like how yes, it needs to be a level of structure, I guess, with when you're working with neurodivergent individuals, which pretty much anybody who is seeking out some type of specific therapy is likely to be some sort of because neurodivergent, the umbrella, it encompasses so much, right? So like, is that bad therapy or is that just, this is a structure. This is how CBT works. This is how ERP works. This is how DBT works. And you're going to have to follow this.
Yeah. So there are certainly some formats of therapy that are more structured or less structured, or more or less what's called directive, which is like, more directive is the therapist is kind of leading it, less directive is you're kind of leading it. So there are legitimate differences, but what we know from the research on therapy or therapy effectiveness is that the differences between the different modalities are a very small percentage of what actually determines if the therapy is effective for you or not. That the biggest impact is what's called common factors, which are things that are true across whatever therapy style. And it's things like, do you and the therapist have a rapport? Like, do you feel like you can, trust the therapist and are safe with them? Do you have a common understanding of what the goals are for therapy? Can you give the therapist feedback about what's working and what's not working? Those are the things that, again, doesn't matter what acronym of letters the therapist says that they're doing. If those things are present in the therapy, then it's likely to be effective. And if those things are not present, then it's likely to not be effective. And I think that, like, what I would say is that a most good therapists, in my experience, are able to be flexible in how they do things. So again, even if somebody is a CBT therapist, and I mean, like, I use some CBT in my practice, right? Even if somebody is a CBT therapist, they're not going to be like, oh, well, this thing that I told you didn't work, so I'm gonna tell you again, but louder. Like that's just bad therapy. They're going to be, they're going to be curious. They're going to find a way to adapt it. They're going to be flexible. And so again, I think that potentially certain styles of therapy are going to attract certain kinds of people. And so, is it possible that within a CBT therapist is going to be a little bit more likely to be, rigid and, not willing to listen to you? I mean, maybe, but then also a therapist who picks a really non-directive style might be more likely to not have clear goals, which would be
Right.
another issue that could
Right.
impact the therapy. So
Yeah.
it really is like, it's not about picking the one right modality. It's about picking the right therapist for you.
Right. That's very well said. The right therapist for you, which is also hard, which is why advocacy is such an important piece, which you see the adults, and advocacy wasn't necessarily part of the curriculum, right? It was just kind of like, okay, just go out there. This is how you're supposed to do things, and you're supposed to do it like your neurotypical counterparts, and good luck, right? Like the chain, like your metaphors are phenomenal, but the chain, like the elephant and the chain there. And now it's all about building up the advocacy skills so that hopefully when therapy is introduced, because a lot of individuals do need this therapy. I believe everybody should be in some sort of therapy, especially with whatever's going on in this world. But every day is a new day. But yeah, it's just, it's just like, I don't know, a horror movie. But basically, I think that they're better equipped now, it seems like, to advocate and know, okay, this is a therapy that I need. And then coming to you, you probably help them speak up for their specific goals. But it's not automatic for some of these adults who didn't really have that, like rah, 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 advocate for yourself like we do now.
Yeah, no, I think that some people kind of have the experience of the nail that gets stuck, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down.
Yeah.
And for many people, like, most autistic people don't mask because it's fun. Like, they
Right.
mask because it feels unsafe to do anything
Hmm.
else. And part of masking is to just hide a need that you have, to be like, "Oh, that support would really be useful, but I'm not gonna bring it up because what if I say, like, if I'm, my friends are trying to organize a social event at a nightclub where the sensory environment is gonna be a nightmare for me. If I say, "Hey, what if we went to the library instead?" Like, well, are my friends gonna be like, "That's weird. We don't wanna be
Mm,
friends with you anymore. There's a risk." So maybe then I say, "Okay, I'm gonna just stick with the nightclub." And I think that part of, again, going back to that elephant metaphor, I think in our past, we often learn that the danger is just everywhere, or at least that the danger is unpredictable, that there's no way of knowing who's gonna be safe, who's not gonna be safe, who we can ask for help, who's gonna punish us for that, and so we just never ask anybody for help. And then I think that some of the learning is to be like, you know what? There are kind people and less kind people in this world. And you
yep.
can, it's not perfect, but you can learn to kind of tell the difference and figure out, like, sometimes I'll work with somebody and it'll be like, and they're like, "Oh, I'm really afraid that if I ask my friend for this, then they're gonna not want to be my friend anymore." And it's like, okay, well, has anybody else asked your friend for stuff? Oh yeah, like, so and so, so and so, so and so have all made request, and did anything happen to them? No. And like, has your friend ever been mean? No. Okay, well then, I mean, it's possible that your
Right.
friend is secretly just waiting for somebody to unmask and then they'll be cruel, but probably we have a lot of evidence that supports the idea that this friend is probably safe. Whereas, your boss at work that yells at everybody for being 2 minutes late, that person's probably not safe. And so that might not be a place
I
where,
remember that boss.
yeah, yeah, that
We
boss.
all had one of those, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
exactly. And so then the work becomes like, well, okay, maybe then you get support somewhere else, and then maybe long term you think about, could you find a workplace where you have a boss that could be, better for you, and could you, and helping people believe that that's possible, because sometimes they don't think that a better world is ever, like, sometimes I'll make a video on social media about, like, oh, like, you can make friends, and then people come up and be like, "No, I can't." Like, that's is just completely impossible. And I'm like, I don't
Right.
know them. They're just a comment, but I don't think that's true for anybody. I think everybody has something valuable to offer to somebody else in this world.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that it all goes back to confidence, in my opinion, building up individuals' confidence, whether they're neurodivergent or not. And a lot of people just don't believe that they have the ability to get out of that workplace. I've been there before, what am I going to do next, right? How am I going to face it? And then when you bring in the autism and the social piece, it's even more complex because it's like, oh no, like maybe this is normal, these social interactions. Maybe it's normal for the person to behave like that, so more vulnerability probably present. But I feel like a lot of the things you're speaking to are all about, in a universal way, just having the confidence that you can be unshackled. Like, no matter what is going on in your life, you can take shackles off. It takes risk, and I guess there's a risk assessment that you have to do and pros and cons, but you definitely shouldn't be in a situation where you're unsafe. And I think that that's the vulnerability piece that I've seen, especially at that vulnerable teen and tween age where, it's just so tough. And I've seen so many along the way just think the opposite. It's not even asking, it's they think they need to give. They think they need to give, 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 and then they'll have a friend. Like almost like buying a friend kind of situation, especially with the girls I've seen more than the boys, but that could just be my experience. And in reality, they're being taken advantage of. So that's been very difficult to see, and I'm sure that that has just a ripple effect of mental health issues later down the line. So speaking of those mental health issues or challenges, I don't want to say issues, we all have issues, but mental health challenges, are there any specific ones that you see that are very much co-occurring with autism, whether it's anxiety, depression, anything else that you
Yeah.
feel like turns up as an adult?
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna, I know that the research shows a higher comorbidity between autism and various mental health conditions. I don't have those stats in my brain, and
Right,
I
right.
don't wanna
Just based on your own,
ChatGPT
yeah,
hallucinate and
experience.
just make
Yeah,
something
yeah,
up
yeah.
for you, and so I think it does, co-occur. I think in my experience, I see it most prominently, linking up with, depression and anxiety, but that's my experience. I don't wanna say that those are the things
Sure.
that are most likely to go with autism across the whole population.
Okay. But there is definitely a co-occurrence of a lot of different forms of maybe anxiety, depression, just because of the fact that you're othered. When you're othered, you can develop other problems
Yeah.
or difficulties. Okay. So now I would love to take a dive into your version of love on the spectrum because you found love and it's not necessarily exactly a love story like that, but it's interesting because part of the confidence that I've seen along the way is partnership, right? Finding that partner and people feeling like they're inadequate just in general. I mean, the dating world now is just something else anyway. So it's just, another level of complication, but you actually found love with someone who has ADHD, right?
I
And
did,
so
yeah.
and so you were able to support each other in those kinds of ways. You understand each other on a certain level maybe than maybe others wouldn't.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that partially it's, which is what you want in every marriage, like, you have complementary, strengths and weaknesses, right? Like, there's some things that are, much harder for my wife and much easier for me and vice versa, and I think that autism I've heard again, I'm not familiar with any research on this, but I've
Sure.
heard anecdotally that there's a lot of autism ADHD pairings because those
Yes.
things often,
That
it kind of makes sense how those conditions would feed into each other in a positive way. So I think that that's part of it, and then I think part of it is also as we were talking about earlier, like the empathy and the graciousness, right? Like if I tell my wife, hey, the dishwasher needs to be unloaded, and she says she'll do it, and then she forgets, like I don't think like, oh my goodness, like she doesn't
Mhm.
want to contribute, like she
Right,
deliberately,
right.
like I'm like,
That's what someone would say, right? That's
yeah,
what a
exactly.
lot of
Yeah, like
people would
someone
say.
would
Yeah.
potentially say that if they didn't have
Mhm.
empathy, but I'm able to say like, well, like she has ADHD, and so like chances are it just literally exited her brain. It was not her choice. It was not her fault, and I can just be, kind to her about that, or vice versa. If I say something that is awkward or unintentionally
Mhm.
has a sharp edge that I didn't intend or something like that, then she can be like, okay, well, instead of thinking, oh, Daniel probably means to say this hurtful thing, she can be like, wait a minute, probably this is an autism thing. And, this is just a communication issue. And I can clarify with him. And so we give each other a lot of grace, which I mean, I think is necessary in any kind of marriage. I can't imagine how anybody gets through life without a lot of empathy,
Patience,
forgiveness,
right?
giving each other the benefit of
Yeah.
the doubt. But I think that having your own neurodivergence can make it easier for you to have empathy for somebody else's neurodivergence.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I know opposites attract, they say, but I think there's something to be said about people who have things in common that can understand each other. A level of understanding to be understood, I feel like is just something that people sometimes wait a whole lifetime to really feel like somebody understands them. So it's so great that you guys understand each other and that you are not going to tell your wife, "Oh, I can't believe you forgot to do that." But I get both sides. I understand that people do get frustrated. It's not always so easy. I'm sure it helps that you're a psychologist as well, because I'm sure you bring that into the home, right?
It's funny because my best friend is also a psychologist, and so,
Mhm.
like, our disagreements must sound just, like, so strange to somebody else because it's like, you know, "I hear you that you this, but then the way that it makes me feel is this," and like, "Oh, thank you for sharing that with me," and, like and I mean, you know, it's not like we're, like, robots, right? Like, we have
No.
all of the feelings, like, you know, my best friend has done stuff that's made me mad or, you know, let me down, like, you know, vice
Right.
versa, but it's just that we're able to and keep the lines of communication open, and instead of being like, I'm gonna hurt you, I'm gonna say something mean, we can be like, I'm gonna communicate, I'm gonna be understood by you, you can be understood by me, and then when we get to the other side of that, then usually we can find a solution, we can resolve the problem. And you know, my wife and I, it's the same thing. We have, you know, like it's not that when my wife doesn't unload the dishwasher that I'm just like, la di da. Like sometimes that can be frustrating or irritating or
Of
whatever.
course.
But I can be like, I can express my irritation to her, not in a way of trying to hurt her, but in a way of expressing a need. Like, hey, I have this feeling now. Can we take care of that? Like, and then she of course wants to and finds a way to make me feel better.
I feel like that kind of language though is so important in general because I think that so many times, and I'm guilty of it because I'm human, but it's just so easy to just with a friend or a significant other or a child, it's so easy to just say like, why would you do something like that? What were you thinking? And everyone is just frustrated and upset, and nobody's actually saying, well, when you do that, like I kind of makes me feel uncomfortable or kind of makes me feel like annoyed, like you don't care, like I feel like there needs to be more of that in our society of people saying like actually like I validate it, like I'm validating you, right? But at the same time like I'm also letting you know that, this is how I feel. No, I don't think people should be necessarily pushovers, right? And not express
Yeah.
themselves. But
I
it's the way you express, I guess.
Yeah, I believe this metaphor into most of my talks because I just feel like this is so powerful. I learned it from one of my supervisors when I was in training, but it's this idea of compassionate curiosity, which is like, you know, if you adopt a dog and you bring the dog home and then you're like, "Oh, how cute," but then the dog chews up your socks, you don't assume that the dog is evil or wants you to suffer, right? Like if you know anything about dogs, you're like, "Well, this is a good dog." And
Hmm.
so like so then your understanding it starts from the assumption of this is a good dog. You're not like, well, maybe the dog hates me. No, like it's a good dog. And then that's the compassion part. And then the curiosity is why would a good dog do a bad thing? So you are starting your questioning from that assumption that they're good. And then of course it leads you to like, well, maybe I didn't play with them all day or, you know, and if I just did that, then they'd stop chewing up my socks. So you can still solve the problem. You don't have to just accept like, oh, well, I can't ever be mad at my dog or be upset that they chew up my sock. No, like you can still be you can still want to solve the problem, but you can solve the problem in a way that doesn't impact your love and affection for the dog. And the same thing is true of, you know, any relationship, right? Like if my, you know, like if I'm late to a hangout with my best friend, which is a thing that happens sometimes, you know, he doesn't have to be like, oh, does Daniel hate me or doesn't care about the friendship? He can be like, all right, why would somebody who loves me, who's my best friend, still be late for our hangout? And then, you know, we can figure out a solution together based off of that so that he still gets me to show up on time, but without me feeling like I'm bad.
And also, I feel like all of us have our triggers. Like, for example, lateness for me. I just grew up in a family that was very prompt. My dad was born in Germany. I feel like that may have contributed to he was actually early to things, not even prompt. So, this chronic late thing, I know for me is like a trigger because I feel like, wait, why is someone like taking time away from me? I'm waiting for them. But I feel like you made me think about it in a different way that okay this is a person that runs late for a variety of different reasons. Their intention probably isn't to take time away from me, but let's try to figure out like what actually is going on, right? Like that compassionate curiosity, which is hard in the moment when it was, the 15th or 1500 time that, if they're a close friend that, they're running so late and you're like, wait, what's going on? So, but you know what? One thing I learned about that is you can also meet people where they are. So I started running late. Now, as a psychologist, that may not be the right.
Well, I mean, I think that that's honestly a good like. It, I think that the goal of like a boundary is not to like punish somebody. It's to be like, what can I do to still want to be in a relationship with this person? And
Hmm.
so if like they're going to run late every time and you're going to show up on time, and then every time you're going to be like stressed out and like I don't even want to hang out with you anymore because I'm stressed out, then okay, well then that's not going to protect a relationship. Whereas if you say, you know what, like I'm going to be late too, like whatever, like then it you know, it's maybe not the ideal situation of them just being able to get there on time, but it's actually an investment in the relationship. It allows you to say, all right, this is what I need to do to be okay with this. And I think that finding those answers oftentimes is the way forward. And like, I mean, if you're in a relationship where like you constantly have to do that and you can't, like, the other person never wants to do anything to meet you halfway, then that's an indication that maybe that person's not great for you. But in general, we're all just doing our best out here, and
Yeah.
being willing to give grace to one another, I think I give it my seal of approval as a psychologist.
Okay, great. So that's something I can work on. And setting up boundaries, I know is key in general. And I'm sure you work on that with your patients who a lot of people violate boundaries. But of course, when it comes to our autistic individuals, their boundaries sometimes are even more violated, I find, because they don't know how to always socially say, hey, no, advocate. No, this is not going to be okay. Speaking of which, all of this relates to social. All of this relates to a lot of us in terms of getting back to that universal social piece and how you started socialskills.com, right? And so it was for improvement for everybody. And you bring it now into work in terms of workplaces, where you come into workplaces and you help people with interpersonal skills, right, in different corporations and things like that. And what are you finding is like the biggest breakdown as society evolves in terms of the social or communication breakdowns that are occurring in these workplaces? Because I know a lot of workplaces are very difficult to work in. I actually only know like a couple of people that are like really thrilled about their work environment right now, and
Yeah.
that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, so I speak on a variety of things in the
Yeah,
workplace. The most common and popular one that I do is on neurodiversity, because it's like,
of course.
we can talk to autistic people and be like, here's what you can do to adapt to this environment. But it's much better if we can talk to everybody else and say, how can we make an environment that autistic people don't have to struggle so much in? But I do, to your point, like, I also speak on, burnout in the workplace and loneliness in the workplace, because I think a lot of people are bringing that into work. And as you mentioned, it's hard to find workplaces that people feel like this is really working well for me. And I think that partially it's because there's stuff in people's lives more generally that isn't working for them. Like, I think that
Mm,
with the loneliness piece, workplaces actually have a really unique opportunity, because it's one of the few places left where you gather on a regular basis with people that you are kind of different than you, that are
yeah,
multi-generational, that you don't already know. Like, so often, people nowadays, they just spend all their time by themselves on a screen, with like the same few people that they already know. And then they wonder why they're lonely. And it's because you're not actually putting yourself
connection.
in a position to
Right.
make friends. And, the workplace, it's not the ideal social environment, because you're there to do a job and it's your career, but it is an opportunity to build real connection. And, the organizations where the connections are stronger, where people feel like they belong, where people feel like they have a friend at work, people are do better work. And so I try to kind of make the case for like, look, if you set up your organization such that it can help people feel less lonely, you're not only helping people that need a place to connect, but you're helping the business be more successful as well, because people are going to work better for you if they can make friends at the office.
Right. And it's all about acceptance, just in all
Mhm.
forms, accepting people for who they are, coming to the workplace and understanding that you don't need the exact same values or the exact same outlook on things in order to be friends with each other. I think the most damaging thing, in my opinion, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that in some workplaces, it becomes like a culture of cliques, right? Cliques form, right? And then again, we get into that thing of being othered, right? And then the motivation declines, I feel like, for a lot of people who are like outside of the clique, right? And then if you're inside the clique, you may not last in the clique, right? So it's kind of like it's human nature to form groups, but I feel like in the workplace, especially, you don't want to feel like you're doing your work alone.
Yeah, no, exactly. And yeah, I think a lot of times organizations, it's the clicks. And so either you're just on the outside and then you're like, well, why would I do my best work for a team that doesn't really want me here? Or in order to get into the click, you have to like pretend to be somebody that you're not.
Yeah.
And then that's its own sort of problem, because that in some ways deepens loneliness, because it doesn't actually feel like connection if you're not showing up as your real self.
Yeah, definitely. Then you're just faking it. And I feel like that's why I haven't been really good at maintaining groups in general. Like I'm more of a someone who hangs out with people one on one or in a group of two or three. And I always found whenever I was even in a group chat, I would have to just like either mute it or like end up leaving just because there's so many things going on at the same time. And it's so easy to feel like either misunderstood by the group or maybe the group is talking to each other and you feel like on the outskirts. I don't know. I always question myself like why I wasn't really much of a group person, but I guess I just like different types of people that maybe don't. blend together, and I can't really fake it because I grew up in Brooklyn and we're very real
Yeah.
over there. I don't know.
I what I'd also say is that the structure of the group matters a lot, and so sometimes, like, if the group is just unstructured, right? It's like, oh, like,
Yeah.
we all just go out for drinks afterwards. Well, then that can make it really hard to be like, "Well, where like, how do I make a connection? What do I
Right.
like?"
Right.
Whereas if it's like, oh, like, we're all, like it's Habitat for Humanity, and we're all gonna be building a house together, and then we're gonna be
Yeah.
talking about, "Hey, bring some more sawdust over here." What I don't know how to build a house, but, like,
No,
you know,
I mean, don't give me even I don't even know how to use a hammer, so
okay,
yeah.
well, and or maybe, you go to a board game club, or you go to like a trivia night at the bar where you join a team, like those kinds of experiences where there's more structure, that can make it a lot easier because there's sort of like a path getting you into the connection. And I think that that's especially critical for autistic people, but really for everybody. Like I don't know how anybody makes friends just go into a cocktail hour and it's just completely unstructured. You just have to talk to folks. It having some guardrails guiding you towards the connection oftentimes makes it much easier for you to figure out if there's a chance for connection there.
Right, and to your point, in these workplaces, you find that, with the clicks or with people trying to get into someone's favor, it sometimes or always leads into this non-authentic connection, and non-authentic connection is not healthy in a workplace or in any other place because then it's not real, and then people are not feeling connected, right, in the same kinda way, and you're trying to bring people together in a authentic way, right? Not just like, "Okay, just guys get together, work, collaborate, that's it," right? It's more of how do you get people to stay connected? How do you motivate them? And culture, I guess, is created by, I guess it's top down usually, right? And so you help the ones on top, right, really get to the ones who are downstream.
Yeah, it really, I mean, like the critical ingredient is safety, right? Like, can
Yes.
I bring my
Mhm.
real self here and not be punished for it? I remember talking to a guy who was a Google engineer, so, very successful, very capable
Mhm.
dude,
I
but
know
then
those. Yeah,
yeah,
they're
but like
really
at a
great.
also very autistic, and at a previous workplace, so not Google, but a previous one, he had gone to his manager and asked for some support and said like, "Hey, I'm autistic." And then the manager was like, "No, I don't think you are. Like, you don't seem autistic to me." And then, like, not only didn't give him the support, but also like punished the guy for like, you know,
Dear. Yeah.
or like never treated the guy the same way after that point. And so then he learned, okay, well, this isn't safe. Like, why would I bring my real self here?
Mhm.
And that, like, most autistic people have had experiences like that where we take the mask off in some way, we bring more of our real self into the interaction, and then somebody's like, "Ew, like, I don't want that," or, like, and so it feels safer to just
Mask.
always keep that mask on. Yeah, and again, even if you're not autistic, I think that same
In
principle can
general,
play out,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, you wanna
People,
feel safe. Yeah,
yeah,
you'll do
to
whatever it
bring,
takes.
yeah,
Yeah.
the more authentic versions of yourself, and so I think that the workplace, it requires leadership asking the question of, like, what can we do to encourage a culture of safety, to reward people for bringing their real selves, for cutting down on, workplace bullying or cliques, or, or setting up community opportunities for people to make friends. Like, those are intentional strategic decisions that workplaces can make it easier. So it's not to say that you can never be safe unmasking at work. You just need the environment to be correct.
Yeah, and I think also social opportunities at work. I think that so I've worked in numerous places within the education system, and I found that some leaders are more aware of this and set up a lot of social situations where people can mingle and also make sure that people mingle with each other that are wouldn't normally communicate with each other just by the way that they set it up in terms of grouping people at an event. And then there are some places that just have no social gatherings at all. And basically, it's like come into work, do your job, and leave. And then if you make a couple of friends, you make a couple of friends, great. But I find that that's not helpful in terms of the motivation piece because, like you said, connection is everything, everywhere, and in the workplace especially, which is why it's important to have people like you speaking on that to all these corporations. So basically we've touched upon a bunch of things, right? And from we've gone from just the, even just going back to where you started off with, and then just in terms of the psychological effects of everything, to your love story, to this, the impact that you're making on the workplace. Is there any one piece of advice that you can give to people who are listening about social communication in terms of like where people might be getting it wrong or missing the mark? Like, for example, why is it so difficult to maintain interpersonal relationships, whether you're neurodivergent or not? Like, is there a piece of advice you can give that can help people
Yeah.
have better interpersonal skills in general? I know
Yeah.
that's a big one. That's a really
No.
big, yeah.
But it's a great question. I think that the biggest this is obviously a generalization,
Yeah, and
and
that's
it's
okay.
not yeah,
It
it's
we
not always gonna be true, and I'll maybe explain a little bit of the nuance, but the biggest thing that I think I would want people to take away is understanding that how do I say it? It's rare for you to actually be failing in the way that you think that you're failing. I think it's very common, especially if you've experienced rejection in the past or whatever, for you to walk away from a social interaction and think, I screwed that up. I was so awkward. I did that. Like, but then in reality, all of these things that you're beating yourself up for, the other person forgot about them 2 minutes after it happened, right? There was
true.
a discussion that I read about online where somebody was like, I went to a party in college with some friends, and we thought it'd be hilarious to like douse ourselves with water and show up to the party sopping wet. And we were like, everybody's gonna be like, whoa, you're so wet. And nobody commented on it. Nobody even
Oh,
noticed that they were just head to toe drenched and they showed up to the party. And it's like if people didn't notice that, then they're probably not going to notice the fact that maybe you told a joke that wasn't that funny or you rambled on for a little bit too long. And so, like, I think that realizing that can sometimes give you courage to try again and to say, like, well, maybe that went better than I thought it did. And obviously, there's things that you can do that really are bad, right? If you go to a party and you tell a bunch of racist jokes, well, then yeah, you're probably
yes.
not going to be invited back to that
Right.
party.
Right.
But that's like what I often try to tell people is to put yourself in the other person's shoes and be like, if the other person did this to you, would you be upset? And chances are, if somebody like if it's like, oh well, the other person told a joke and it wasn't that funny, would you be upset with that person? No, like who would,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so then that can give you the courage to say, I'm going to try again. And then I think also realizing that like everybody's having a hard time with this. You know, everybody feels overwhelmed, everybody feels stretched too thin, everybody feels, lonely to differing degrees. And so the fact that maybe, this person didn't reach out to you right away, I mean, maybe that means they're not interested in you, but it might also mean that they just didn't have the spoons for today. And it might be worth giving them another try and seeing what's there. Because yeah, again, if they're not interested, then you'll try a couple times and it'll become abundantly clear that they're not interested. But what if they're just going through a hard time? What if they're just overwhelmed? What if they would really appreciate a friend? And the fact that you knocked twice or three times instead of giving up after just once means the difference between making that friendship or not.
You made me think of something somebody once told me. Of course, a lot of things I've said have been told by other people that those are the best nuggets, right? But about how people need to learn about how it's not about a first impression, it's about a second impression almost. Like the first impression is so hard for us because as people, I feel like we put so much emphasis on that, and other people place emphasis on the first thing that happened, the first interaction. And it would be so wonderful if we always gave everybody a second impression and just didn't think about that first impression because there are so many things we could judge people by just automatically. I feel like, right, as people, we just internally judge. But that second impression can change things to your point of, people do show more grace. And it's interesting also because I remember it was maybe like a week and a half ago, I was in the elevator of where I live here in New York City in my apartment building. And there was someone who had just finished an interview, I guess remotely because they were in the elevator going down. And this kid, these days it's a kid. I don't know. He must have been like maybe 20 or something. And I guess he just saw somebody who maybe I looked like a friendly face or something. And he just started saying, I just had this interview. I just bombed it. It was so terrible. And I said to him, actually, like maybe it was the best interview and you don't realize it because what you perceive to be bad, I had to learn this the hard way too. The other people didn't even notice. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, what if it's that like I actually answered questions incorrectly? This is for a tech job. And I answered, and I said, well, maybe then they'll like you even more because you have a learning curve and you're not a know-it-all. And so he's like, oh, really? And so I feel like, yeah, I think there's a lot of insecurity that we're all holding on to. But I guess your point is building up confidence is really important because that's what allows interpersonal relationships to really thrive, right?
Yeah, I think it's people like you find success by rolling the dice and trying over and over. And it's not going to happen every time, right? Like not every person that you strike up a conversation with will become your new best friend, but you're not going to find your new best friend unless you're willing to strike up conversations. And when we beat ourselves up, it makes it really hard to try because the failure feels so awful. We're like, oh, I did that interview and I bombed it and now I just have to
Mhm.
go be depressed for a week. Well, you're not going to do very many interviews. And
Right.
maybe you're not going to get that job in the first interview, but maybe,
Mhm.
the second or the fifth or the 10th is going to lead you to the job, or the, second, fifth, 10th party you go to is going to lead you to a new friend group. And like, being willing to say, like, you know what, even if I wasn't perfect, that still went okay, and that was worth doing. I think that gives you the resilience to keep going. And I think it's also important to recognize that, like, you get to feel like you get to choose who you have in your life. And
Mm.
and if you're worried that, oh my goodness, well, I bombed that first impression and they're never going to want to talk to me again, then what you've done is you've said, all right, well, maybe this person that judges somebody like that and makes a very fast, superficial judgment and decides that I'm not worth anything because I told one joke that didn't go well. Well, do I actually want that person in my life? Or would I rather have people in my life who are a little bit more patient, a little bit more curious, who are willing to have a second conversation with me, even if the first one wasn't perfect? And chances are you're going to be much better off filling your life with the people who are willing to give you a little bit of grace. And so it's not actually a loss if some superficial judgmental person doesn't want to be your friend. They probably weren't going to be a good friend to you anyway.
Yeah, and in the workplace, we find this a lot too, right? But sometimes you can't choose your bosses. You could only set boundaries and see how long you can last in a toxic environment, which unfortunately, I mean, you're as a psychologist, it's hard for to last in one of those. But thank you so much, Dr. Wendler, Dr. Dan, for everything. I think you shared so much in terms of just confidence, resilience, but also just mental health and us just feeling safe. I think safety is really a big message here that is a big takeaway. And I know that the listeners are going to really just appreciate everything that you shared from your own perspective as growing up with autism, but also just in terms of social as a whole. Like it's the building block of everything. And as a society, we need to do better at this. So yeah.
Well, I mean, people talk about the loneliness epidemic. I think it's one of the biggest
Yeah.
challenges of our time, and everything. My grandma used to say, if you want to have a friend, you got to be a friend. And I like to
Mm,
encourage people, like, every time that you're courageous and go and do a social thing, you're not just helping to solve loneliness for you, you're helping to solve loneliness for the person that you might meet.
that's such a great point. I feel like it reminds me of something from Winnie the Pooh. I don't know why, but Winnie the Pooh said something. I don't know. For some reason, it came to my mind. See, we all have little moments. But anyway, but thank you so much again for being here. Where can everybody reach you, follow you? I know that you have a website, but you also have an Instagram and you also have bookings in terms of workplaces.
Yeah, so if people go to danielwendler.com, then they can learn about me, get links everywhere. But otherwise, like, I'm on most social media platforms. So if you look for my name or you look for Dr. Dan, autistic psychologist, I'm going to pop up, and you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, wherever. And then, yeah, I do a lot of, keynote talks, corporate trainings. So, if you happen to be running an autism conference, or if your workplace needs somebody to come in and talk about neurodiversity, there's information on my website about the kind of speaking that I do as well.
Amazing. I
Also, I
think
have
I'm
some books on
what?
Amazon. Also, I have a couple books on Amazon. They're a little bit older, but I do have some books if you want even more of them.
Wait, what do you mean older books from?
So, yeah, so I have,
Yeah,
improveyourSocialSkills.com. I turned it into a book, and
right.
so the book Improve Your Social Skills is available on Amazon. I have another social skills book called Level Up Your Social Life, but those are both written, almost 10 years ago. And then I have a newer book called Neurodiversity and the Myth of Normal that is co-authored.
That one
But
I
it's
saw, yeah.
it's an Audible exclusive, so you can only listen to it on audiobook. So my most recent accessible stuff is all of the social media. But if you really want all the Dr. Dan you can get in your life, then you can go look at my Amazon page and take your pick.
Amazing. I think after this, I'm gonna have to book a therapy session with you. There's some things I need to break down. But yeah, thank you so much again for being here. It was just so lovely to have you.
Yeah, Sharon, it was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.